Hi, everyone. Welcome to Support Group on Zoom. It's a great platform. Tonight, I'll introduce our speaker in just a bit. We're talking about accessibility for the Apple devices, which I think is great for low vision people and those of us who can see well, but there are occasions when we need assistance in seeing. Maybe our eyes are tired, we have a flare, etc. So I'm real excited to learn all about this. This support group format will be with lecture, and then we will open it up for discussion. I don't think that we will have time for introducing ourselves. I think some of you may know each other because you were on past support groups, but if we have time, we will do that. But otherwise, we'll have lecture and questions, and this will also be up on the website. And I think some of you may have received in advance the notes to this lecture as well. So welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Our speaker is Katherine Gastler. She is an IT professional with a focus on making technology understandable and accessible to everyone. She currently works at Jolt Technology and previously taught classes at Apple retail stores for 6 years on a variety of topics, but specializing in photography and vision accessibility. She was chosen for a 4-month career experience with Apple in Cupertino, California, contributing to the design of training materials for classes worldwide, including redesigned resources for accessibility workshops. She graduated from Concordia University in Chicago with degrees in art, graphic design, and Spanish. And the reason why, and I'm making an assumption here, she is so dedicated to all this is because Katherine also has uveitis. So she is a patient. She was diagnosed at age 14, and she understands periods of low vision and is really passionate about helping others use technology to achieve their goals. So we're real excited to have her and all her experience and helping us out tonight to navigate when maybe our eyes are tired or we're having a flare of vision's low, or maybe we've lost our vision to our disease. So I want to just make a couple of announcements before I turn over the mic to Katherine. I just want to announce the next Zoom support group, which will be May 4th. And that'll be at 7:30 again. And that's Dr. Nisi, who will be discussing advocating for yourself with doctors who are less familiar with eye inflammation. So that will be an interesting event. And then, whoopsie, something happened there. But our Walk for Vision, if everybody can do a save the date, it's going to be June 7th. And it is also going to be on Zoom again. Some of you attended last year, and it was actually a really fun event on Zoom. We had a great time and people really enjoyed it. So I hope you do get involved and join the walk and get some donations for the foundation. And with that said, I'd like to turn over now to Katherine. Thank you so much for dedicating your time tonight to helping us as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to share. So let's get our screen sharing here. All right, and you are seeing just my clean slides, correct?
Correct.
Beautiful. We've already talked about this. Just a brief recap of a few things about me. I work in IT, have taught classes at Apple for 6 years, and I learned at the beginning of my journey at Apple teaching classes, and I said, oh, we provide services for blind people or deaf people or things like that. And I said, oh, nobody wants to learn about that? Well, I'd love to learn about that. So most of these things I've using the resources at Apple, we had some training resources, but I'm the kind of person who loves reading the manual and can hopefully translate it well to other people who maybe don't like doing that so much. So I've taught myself most of these features. And when I do have a flare-up, I think it's really helpful. I kind of think of this as getting some more tools in your toolkit. So hopefully, maybe these aren't things you use every day. I certainly don't use all of these features every day, but it's nice to know about them, because when I'm having a flare-up, or maybe I can't see as well, or even just sometimes I want to multitask, it's helpful to be able to pull out some of these skills. So I was first diagnosed actually in college about 14 years ago. I would be curious as a fellow person in the support group. So I'm happy to share my current diagnosis are related to eye things anyway, are ankylosing spondylitis, uveitis, scleritis. I've had lots of front of eye inflammation, back of eye inflammation. My eyes will get inflamed all kinds of different ways. I currently manage that with Cimzia, a biologic injection, not into my eyes. Fortunately, no eye injections at this moment. People always ask about that. You inject things into your eyes? No, just a regular injection. And then I found the AIP diet and lifestyle really helpful at various points to, in addition to medication, to help control my inflammation. That's been really helpful. Things I couldn't have done if I tried. These are all the different places I've seen an ophthalmologist. I currently live in St. Louis, being diagnosed in college. I've lived different places. Even with my 4-month career experience in California, I got to drive an hour to San Francisco to see some ophthalmologists there, and I studied abroad in Spain and got to see. I've had a few flare-ups over the years. I don't even keep track anymore, but so I've seen eye doctors a lot of different places. Very grateful for my study team in St. Louis and not having to see so many different people. Just a brief overview. Here are some of the features. There are countless features for Apple products. I'm focusing on Apple because that's what I'm familiar with. Windows and Android products obviously have their own features. There's way more than I could possibly talk about in one support group. So I've chosen what I think is most likely to be helpful and the things that I use the most. But if you hear about something else, there's countless things out there that are helpful. And again, like Francis mentioned, I kind of look at this as tools to make things a little bit easier on your low vision days. I know I find it a little bit easier to tackle new skills, maybe learn some new things when I'm not in that crisis or extra stress of having a flare up. So I like to learn. Anytime I'm between flare-ups, I like to learn a few things and hopefully make it a little bit easier for the next time. There are lots of tools for the computer. Today, we're going to focus just on iPhone and iPad. The tools for the computer are often very similar. So if you want to try something on your computer, it's probably very similar. Some of the computer tools get a little bit more complicated and it's a little bit more of a learning curve. So iPhone and iPad is a good place to start. Yeah, before we begin, since this is kind of technical, we have some resources for you. So I've shared 3 files in the Zoom chat. Another way to get them would be by scanning this QR code or typing in the bit.ly link there. If you're on the recording, that might be a little bit easier. So there's a PDF, there's 3 files. There's a PDF, which is notes in the same order in which I'm discussing things. So don't feel like you need to write down exactly where all of these features are. It's all in the PDF. And when possible, I linked to the Apple support pages. So Apple, generally speaking, has very good documentation about everything. Sometimes I wish they included a few more pictures, so I've included some videos today. But the PDF is in the same order I'm talking about things. And if you want to refer to the Apple official support documents later, that will be all linked in that PDF for you. And then the 2 other documents, as I was preparing this, I realized, again, I always like to prepare between flare-ups. If there's something I can do to make my life easier when I'm in a stressful flare-up, I found that to be helpful. So the other 2 documents, they're 2 versions of the same thing. I've developed a spreadsheet that I use. So I made a blank template of a medical history document. So I find it really helpful to keep this. One is in the numbers version, which is the Apple spreadsheet program, and the other is in Excel. So they're the same thing, just whichever format is more helpful for you. But I find it really helpful to have all of my medications listed out and my medical history and all the different specialists and their phone numbers and what they're treating me for. So in case that would be helpful to you, that's a format that has worked well for me. So I just keep that on my computer. And if something changes or I need to go to urgent care because I'm having a drug react. I can just type in my 2 new medications, print it out, saves me a ton of writing if you're seeing a new doctor. A couple other PSAs before we begin. Apple adds new features all the time. So all of the headline features I'm talking about will be on any iPad or iPhone that you would be using. Some of the details of those features are newly available in iOS 14. So if there's some detail of what I'm talking about that you're not seeing, there's some slight differences between iPhones and iPads. And I've done my best to note those throughout the specific features. But if you're not seeing something that's there, it could be because it's a new feature in iOS 14 if you haven't updated yet. Like Francis mentioned, I'll have some time for questions until the end. Some of these features build on each other. I'll do my best to slow down and not go too quickly, but we'll have some time for questions at the end. So feel free to note down any questions that you have or throw them in the chat and we can review those at the end. Most things iPad or iPhone are interchangeable, but I believe I have notes throughout the presentation if there's anything that is specific. Let's see if I'm forgetting any other notes before we go on. One last thing I'd like to mention, I kind of consider these, again, tools in your toolbox. So a feature that may work for me really well one day may not work another day. And some of these may not be a good fit for you. Hopefully there's a couple different options that will be helpful for you. So if something doesn't resonate with you or it doesn't feel like it would be a good fit for your situation, let it go. Hopefully there'll be another one that will be helpful for you. So a few of these at the beginning, hopefully I'm going to not go through too fast, but some of these are pretty basic. So hopefully many people may be familiar with these, but just to mention them because I think they can be helpful and you may not have thought of them in the context of flare-ups specifically. So adjusting your screen brightness. I know I am light sensitive, more so even when I'm having a little bit all the time, but more so when I'm having a flare-up. So under settings, display and brightness, you can control just the brightness of your screen. There's more than one place to do this, but the shortcut I'll be showing on the next slides is how to quickly change this on the fly in Control Center. So here's what that looks like. So of course, Apple made all different kinds of phones, so it's harder to give concise instructions. Some phones have Face ID, so you just look at it and it unlocks. Other phones have the home button, so I'll be referring to both of those things in my throughout the presentation. So if you use Face ID to unlock your phone, this is what it looks like to use Control Center and adjust the screen brightness really quickly. So you can swipe down from that upper right-hand corner of the screen and just really quickly slide up or down to adjust the brightness. And here's what that looks like if you have a phone with a home button, you're swiping up from the bottom. So you can really quickly adjust the brightness on the fly. If you're in a bright room, maybe you want to turn it up. If you're in a dark room or a little bit more light sensitive, you can quickly turn that down. The other thing here with both of those, if you press and hold on that same slider, you can turn dark mode on or off. So dark mode just gives you a dark background to your phone. So if I show you this again, if you press and hold, that dark mode in the lower left puts a black background to everything with white text versus white text, black background. One may not make a big difference for you, but one or the other may be more comfortable. Display zoom, you may be familiar with. This is often presented when you're first setting up an iPhone, but if you haven't set one up recently, it may be helpful to revisit this feature. So display zoom is in settings, so under display and brightness, and then display zoom. You may not want to change this if you're watching the Zoom on your phone because it will restart your phone. So you may want to save this one for later. But this is the starting point for making things a little bit larger on your phone. So this is a before and after comparison on 2 screenshots. So without display zoom, it just makes everything just a little bit bigger. All of the icons, most of the text. And it makes your app icons a little bit larger as well. So that's a starter way of making some things bigger. Text size. So if you're having a little bit low vision or even just don't want to look at your phone as much, it may be helpful to size up the text on your phone. And there's kind of a starter way to do this. And then there's a make it extra, extra, extra big. So one is in the regular display and brightness settings. The other is in accessibility settings, which is where some of these more advanced features are. I will note, and I'll show you on the next slide, if you're using those accessibility settings, sometimes things can get cut off. So you may have to adjust up and down until you find a happy medium for you. will be in the main settings. So settings, display and brightness, and then text size. And when you tap on those things, you're presented with this slider that lets you adjust your text size. And this is the largest that this text would go, just as an example. So that's kind of the starter large text. If you go to settings, accessibility, display, and text size, larger text, there's this button at the top of the screen for larger accessibility sizes, and see how much larger. So this would be the largest you could go in the standard settings. And this is the largest you can go in accessibility settings. I prefer to stick one, or say how the little hashes on those little A to big A. I prefer to go 1 or 2 clicks smaller than the largest option. If you go on the very largest option, and it gives you a warning about this, depending on your app, you may not be able to see full words, so you may not be able to navigate as well. So I usually prefer on the large end of this, but maybe not all the way up to the very largest size, because it can get a little bit tricky to use. If you're wanting things this big, I'll show you Zoom a little bit later, and that may be a better feature for you if you want to make things significantly larger. Invert color. I don't find that this makes a huge difference, but could be helpful for you. Same under settings, accessibility, display, and text size. This existed before they had a dark mode. So dark mode is very similar to this idea. Instead of having white background and black text, invert would be black background, white text. So Smart Invert is going to do that for all apps all the way across your phone. So even if an app doesn't support dark mode, you could have that black background if that's easier for your eyes. Classic invert, if you look at the circular picture on here next to John Appleseed here, classic invert makes your pictures look like negatives. So can be a little bit harder to see, but 2 options that you can play with to have that darker background if that's a little bit easier if you're light sensitive. This is one of my favorite features I think anybody can use, Safari Reader. What this does is if you're reading a website with text, so it's not available for every single website under the sun, just websites that have text. So any news website or blog that has a lot of words on it, this view will be typically available. And this works on Mac as well, but it's nice for anybody because it takes away the extra ads. Generally speaking, it's technology, so it's not 100%, but generally it takes away the extra ads and it simplifies your text. So to show you what that looks like, this is the uveitis.org site. So we have some ads and notes at the top of the page before we get into this actual article. But if you tap the 2 A's at the top of the web browser, there's an option for reader view. And there's also options above that with the 100%. You can make the text larger or smaller. Obviously, it works a little bit different depending on the website, but that can be a helpful way to quickly make things a little bit smaller or larger, depending on what you need. And once you tap on those 2 A's, and choose reader view, this is what you get. So before we had kind of a complicated page with small text, this is what it looks like afterwards, much more simplified, and it takes me directly to the beginning of the article. If there's a news site that you visit consistently that you really like this view, by tapping on those A's at the top of the page, you can choose to use reader automatically. So anytime you go to a website, it would pop up once you've turned the setting on. I like using these 2 features together. So if you maybe are having a low vision day and you want to listen to an article, or sometimes I just want to cook something and I want to read this article, but I don't want to sit there and read it. I want to do something else. So you can use this feature called Speak Screen, and whatever words are on your screen, the phone reads it out loud to you. So I think this is useful for anybody. So first you have to turn on the Speak Screen option. So that's under Settings, Accessibility, Spoken Content, and Speak Screen. And I will mention they've reorganized these menus slightly. So if you're on an older phone that's not updated, these features are still there, but it may be in a slightly different spot in settings. So this is what that looks like. So in settings under accessibility, there's spoken content, and then I've turned on the option for Speak Screen. There's more details here, but the important part is that we're turning it on. And then this is what a video of what it looks and sounds like if I was wanting to listen to this article instead of read it. For Speak Screen, I'm taking 2 fingers and swiping down quickly from the top of the screen.
Under Governor Baker's current phase of the reopening guidelines for Massachusetts.
page, I can pause or play. I can change the speed here.
All care, including routine appointments. Mercy has. Please click
the forward button skips forward to a new section. This button, if I want to hear something specific, I can touch something specific I want to hear.
Yeah, despite these advances, surgeons are frequently still disappointed with the.
And it reads a particular area of the screen. So just to review, confirm you can hear the audio in the video, correct? Yes, great. So to review, once you've turned this setting on in your settings app, you can take your two fingers from the very, very top of your phone screen and quickly swipe down, and that starts reading the whole page to you. And if you have a document with a lot of ads in it, it's helpful to turn on that Safari reader view first, and then you'll have a much more simplified web page to listen to as it's reading it out loud. Now, this is a new feature that they've added, which I think could really come in handy in specific situations. So sometimes that, depending on your dexterity and phone size, that two-finger swipe down, it can be a little bit difficult. So they've added this option for speech controller. So once you turn on show controller, they have some actions at the bottom of the screen. So when you turn on show controller, this that last highlight, the little arrow shows up on your screen, and you can use this to quickly activate speak screen without having to do that two-finger swipe down. So to show you what that looks like, here's a video. So for speak screen, I've turned on show controller here. That shows this little arrow on your screen at all times. So for long press, it's going to read everything on the screen.
Show controller on the speech.
It's reading all of this.
To speak screen and speak on touch.
I can pause it. And it shows for double tap is speak on touch. So I can just touch part of the screen.
Double tap, speak on touch.
It just reads that section. So 2 taps.
Idle opacity, 35%.
And I touch the part of the screen I want to hear. So that controller, once you've turned it on, hangs out on your screen all the time. You can kind of put your finger on it and move it out of the way if it's covering something important. But that way, if you're using this feature frequently, that's an easy way to get back to it without having to do that two-finger swipe as much. This is another feature, again, just offering in the toolbox. You'll either love this or hate this. I'm not sure that this is a feature I would use as much, but depending on your situation, I think it could be really helpful. Microsoft has an app that you could sign into with any email. So the Outlook app you can use on iPhones or Androids. You would sign in with whatever email account you use, Gmail, Outlook, whatever. And it will actually read your emails to you. And you can, it's a different way to interact with them. So you can, when you first try this feature, they offer you kind of a brief tutorial how to, they walk you through, you can delete things, you can archive things, you can say, I want to come back to it later. They have a series of, kind of like Siri, they have a series of commands, voice commands that you can use to interact with your emails without reading them. So this is designed for maybe you want to check email while you're in the car or things like that. So once you open the Outlook app, you have either your picture or your icon with your initials in the upper left-hand corner. And that opens a screen that looks like this. And in the lower left-hand corner, there's a little circle with an arrow to play your emails. And then you see a screen that looks like this. I think it's also automatically activated when you plug in your headphones. So if you plug in headphones and open the Outlook app, it should offer this feature to you. Do you want to listen to your emails? I don't like that, at least at this moment, they didn't have the option to speed things up. So I don't know that I have 5 minutes to listen to 7 emails, but if you didn't want to look at your phone, this is another option that's there for you. And it's a free app, so no harm trying it out. So we're getting into a little bit more of some of the more advanced features. Since some of these accessibility features significantly alter the way that you interact with your phone, there are many times people would come to me in the Apple store and say, I have a broken phone. And I'm like, oh no, we just turned on a bunch of accessibility features accidentally, unintentionally, and didn't know how to get out of them. So I don't want you to have an unexpected Apple store visit. So this accessibility shortcut will let you easily turn these features on and off while you're practicing and learning. And it's kind of a escape hatch if you're into a feature that is too much or you're unfamiliar with or just isn't for you. This lets you easily turn it off since they do significantly change how you interact with your phone. So this is under settings, accessibility, and if you scroll clear down to the very last option is the accessibility shortcut. And again, this lets you quickly toggle those advanced accessibility settings. Specifically, we're going to mention Zoom and VoiceOver later. If you want to play around with either of those, I strongly, strongly, strongly encourage turning on this accessibility shortcut first. So here's what that looks like. So again, we start off in the settings app and then accessibility. And then the very, very last option there is accessibility shortcut. And what this lets you do, if you have a Face ID phone, you would be taking the side button that you use to lock or unlock your phone. By pressing that 3 times, it presents you with this menu of whatever options you've chosen. If you have a phone with a home button, you'd be pressing that home button 3 times quickly. And then when you're in the accessibility shortcut settings, you would tap and put a check mark next to any settings that you are interested in using. So if you're never going to use VoiceOver, there's no point in including this in your shortcut. But if you are regularly wanting to play around with Smart Invert, the Magnifier we'll talk about in a moment, you can use this as a shortcut to turn those features on and off. So put a check mark in accessibility shortcut next to any features that you might want to try to quickly turn them on or off. And again, you activate this by taking either your side button. I have an iPhone with Face ID, so your side button, be 1, 2, 3 would activate that, or your home button, 3 quick clicks. Magnifier is another feature that I think not very many people know about, but it's just helpful for everyone. This specifically, so far we talked about making things larger on your phone screen. The magnifier uses your camera to make things larger in the real world. So you can easily take and enlarge a photo, which you can do with the camera app, but this has a few additional features as well. So the magnifier would let you take something like a menu or a serial number or something else that's small in the real world. It's especially helpful, like at the Apple store, reading Apple serial numbers all the time. They often have grime in them and it's hard to read. So you can make them larger. The other thing I really like about it is it doesn't save your photo forever in your camera roll. If I'm just taking a picture of a menu to be able to read it, I don't need to keep it forever. So the magnifier lets you do that really easily. So here's what that looks like. So again, you have to turn this on in settings, accessibility, and magnifier. And this is an option you could turn on in your accessibility shortcut. So if you've chosen magnifier as an option in the shortcut, you can triple click your side or home button to bring this up. Or once you've turned it on in settings, somewhere on your phone, if you're like me, you have 1,000 apps, somewhere on your phone, there is a magnifier app that you can use to just open the app instead of having to triple click the side button. So here's an example of what this looks like in action. So once you have turned on Magnifier, you'll have this app somewhere on your screens. You may need to look around. I can also triple click my home or side button. Open Magnifier. So I can zoom in on something. This is just a serial number I might have trouble reading. I can zoom in to make it bigger. I can also change a filter. And there's a bunch of different ones. Sometimes you have to play around to see which one is better, but invert might actually be helpful here. I can play around with that and kind of tap to get it in focus. And then if I take the picture, I can actually zoom in on this. And my favorite part is this is not saved to my camera roll, cluttering up my other pictures that if it's just for something I need to read. And I can use this slider to make it bigger or smaller. Now this one isn't maybe perfectly clear, but if it's something like a menu, you get the idea. And I could play around with these filters to maybe find one that's better. So I find those filters helpful if you have something that's difficult to read, and depending on your vision situation, you can change those filters to make something significantly more legible. And like I mentioned, it doesn't clutter up your photos. So there's quite a few options in there. If you play around with all the various options, there's a saturation or contrast option that can make things a lot easier to read, especially if the colors aren't very distinct. So getting into some of the more advanced features, zoom would be if physically you could be in a vision situation where you have low vision and you basically can't see the phone. So you want to make things as large as possible. So in this situation, this setting is in settings, accessibility, and zoom. I like the zoom controller. I'll show you in videos in a future slide. I think it makes it a lot easier to use. So if you're just testing this out, I would suggest turning on the zoom controller. Basically, this makes everything on your screen bigger. So to maybe use analogy, you could have the content of your phone, so like what you would normally see on the entire phone screen, you can maybe have that the size of a computer screen, and you're only seeing a small portion of that screen. So your content could be this big, but your phone, you're only seeing a small portion of it at one time. And you can use that zoom controller to move things around. So if this is a feature I would suggest, if you're wanting, if you really need the text as large as the large maximum size on the text enlargement, if you're doing that and that's the size that you need, I would suggest making that maybe a little bit smaller and then combining that with zoom, because this is going to let you make everything on the screen significantly bigger, and it's a much more consistent experience across all of the different apps. Whereas the large text, it may look different, and calendar and other apps may not support it as well. Zoom is consistent across all of the apps. So again, I strongly suggest turning on the accessibility shortcut for Zoom before you do this. If you make your phone so big that you don't know how to navigate it with Zoom, you can get really stuck, and I don't want that to happen to you. And you can't tell Siri to turn off Zoom. You can tell Siri to turn off many of these other features, but Zoom is not one of them. So I really suggest turning on that accessibility shortcut for Zoom, and that lets you use your triple click your side button or triple click your home button to quickly turn Zoom on and off. Also that zoom controller. So these are kind of my suggested settings on the screen. That would be just to start with. You can play around with what works for you, but the ones that I find the most helpful are follow focus on, smart typing on, zoom controller on, and zoom controller gives you a little bit of a escape hatch as well. That is always present on the screen, and that lets you really easily control your zoom, which I'll show in the video in a minute. I like full screen zoom. There's also window zoom. So full screen is going to zoom in everything on the entire screen. Window zoom would be kind of more like using a magnifying glass and only making a small portion of the screen larger. And maximum zoom level controls how big it can get. I would say 5 times is a great place to start. So that way you don't get so zoomed in that you can get really locked out of your phone. So Zoom is one of these features that significantly changes how you use at least this part of the phone. So the first gesture, a lot of these things become gesture based on the phone or iPad. So it would be 3 fingers. So you're touching the phone with 3 fingers at the same time, and you're double tapping. So 3 fingers, 2 taps, tap, tap. They call it a double tap. 3-finger double tap. That lets you zoom in and out. And then that zoom controller will let you control things as well. So here's a video of what that looks like in action. So for Zoom, when I turn it on, it gets really big. The first thing to know is to take 3 fingers, and that lets me move around to different sections of the screen. The next skill for Zoom is 3-finger double tap. So take 3 fingers, tap 2 times, and that lets me zoom in and out on the screen. So for Zoom, there's an option for Zoom controller. When I turn this on, I get this control that appears. There are more advanced options, but just turning it on is enough. I can zoom in. I can touch this again to zoom out. I can also control the level of the zoom here, how much we're zoomed in. And then by touching and holding this, I can zoom around different areas of the screen. So I can use this kind of like a joystick to move around rather than the 3-finger drag, if that's easier. Once I turn the Zoom controller, just to review, I really suggest that Zoom controller as a good way to kind of get in and out of Zoom. Like I showed, you can touch and hold, and then that lets you, since you're only seeing a small portion of the screen at one time, touching and holding that little joystick controller will let you control, do I want to see the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen? And again, if you need things significantly bigger, this is, in my opinion, a little bit easier to use and maybe the largest options on the text size. And if that little joystick is getting in the way, you can touch your finger on it and move it to a different corner of your screen. It takes a little bit of practice. You may need to touch it for just a short amount of time and start moving it, but you can play around with that. And I think this can be a really powerful option if you are you have vision, but you just need things to be a little bit bigger. So VoiceOver is kind of the most advanced setting that we'll talk about today. This is available on the Mac as well. If people are low vision or have, so VoiceOver is really designed for people who are blind. So it allows you to completely interact with everything on your phone without any vision whatsoever. That's how it's designed. So I would say that that's with the caveat, as long as the people design the apps appropriately. So pretty much, unless there's an unusual bug, all of the things that are built into the iPhone by Apple work really well with VoiceOver. I have some links to app suggestions at the end. And so some apps you'll try with VoiceOver and it works beautifully because it's designed that way. Other apps, not so much, and it's completely unusable. It just depends on how the developers have designed the app. But all of the things built in from Apple, all of the built-in Apple apps work just fine with VoiceOver. The nice thing about this is you can use your phone, either you don't want to use your eyes need a break, or sometimes, you know, if I was on the L in Chicago, I could use my phone in my pocket without anybody seeing me, which can be helpful sometimes. But again, this is a significant learning curve. And if you wanted to use this, I'll show you some of the basics, which I think is a good way to get started, and you can certainly play around with it. But it is definitely a learning curve, but it's definitely doable. This, like I said, this significantly changes how you interact with your phone. So it's kind of a little bit like learning a new language, because you do have to learn gestures to do a whole bunch of different things. If you think about all the different ways you might want to look at things on your phone, if you're not using any vision to know where things are, this will let you do it, but it's a learning curve to learn the different shortcuts of how to navigate. But I will say, I'll show you about 4 or 5 key navigation techniques, and you can get a long way just with knowing those. So this would be turned on in settings, accessibility, and VoiceOver. This is one that Siri can turn VoiceOver on and off for you if you are like, okay, I'm done practicing for the day, or I'm really stuck on something, I have no idea where I am. You can ask Siri to say, turn VoiceOver on, turn VoiceOver off, and that works very consistently. I will say I do not suggest combining this with Zoom. You could have Zoom and VoiceOver both in your accessibility shortcut as options, but you can get very, very locked out of your phone if you have Zoom and VoiceOver turned on at the same time. Don't recommend it. So that's another reason I say it's worth having those both in that accessibility shortcut, so you can really quickly turn one on or off if you get stuck. So to show you what that looks like, one comparison, maybe this analogy may be helpful for someone, if not, let it go. But using VoiceOver on an iPhone or an iPad is it's still a learning curve, but it's significantly easier than learning it on the computer. Using VoiceOver on the iPhone and iPad, it's kind of like Battleship. You can kind of consider the phone has discrete elements that are kind of in a grid, which you'll see in the video. On the computer, it's kind of like you got dropped into the middle of the ocean and have to know how to swim. It's not quite as grid-like or as discrete of an option. So it's a little bit easier. Long story short, it's a little bit easier to learn VoiceOver on the iPhone and iPad versus a Mac. And that's what I would suggest starting with if you're new to this and experiencing low vision. So this is turned on in settings, accessibility, and VoiceOver. A couple of the main gestures, since we're assuming that you are not interacting with your phone visually. If you want to open something, tap on something, that's a double tap. If you want to go from interacting with one thing to the next thing, you can swipe right and left to go to the next item on your screen or the previous item on your screen. And if you wanted to scroll through a list or to scroll from one set of apps to another, you would take 3 fingers on the screen to move from one to the other. And here's what that looks like in action. Oh, one other thing I will say. VoiceOver, it's assuming you're not visually interacting with your phone. So it's going to read everything out loud to you. If this is something you're doing in a public place or something you're doing frequently, I highly recommend finding a pair of headphones that works for you, since it's going to read everything out loud to you. That's also helpful if you want to measure privacy while you're using this. Since we set up the accessibility shortcut earlier, I can take the side button and press it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And I have the option to turn on VoiceOver. If you had a home button, you would press that 3 times quickly.
VoiceOver on. Messages.
At this point, VoiceOver reads anything under my finger. So if I touch something,
Photos.
it's read out loud.
Double tap to open.
If I want to navigate from one thing to the next in order, I can take one finger and swipe right.
Photos.
If I want to go backwards, I can swipe left. So if you're in a situation where you don't know what's on the screen, you can swipe right to go sequentially through all of the items on the screen. If I wanted to open something like settings, I can double tap. So at this point, since touching something reads it out loud, I have to double tap if I want to engage something. So I can either double tap by touching something and tapping it twice. I can also touch something and tap with a second finger or thumb.
Bluetooth cellular button. Settings back button. Settings heading.
So when you find something on the screen that you want to interact with, you leave your finger there and then tap with a second finger, which is called a split tap. If I want to scroll up and down, I take 3 fingers to scroll up and down. And that would be the same on the home button. If you don't have a home button and you want to get back to the main screen, I swipe up and wait to get back to the main screen. If I wanted to go to the next page of apps, I would take 3 fingers and swipe, and 3 fingers and swipe back. Anytime you want VoiceOver to stop talking, touch with 2 fingers and it will pause. So as you can see, there's quite a few different gestures to know to really be fluent in VoiceOver. In the resources PDF, Apple has good support articles that list all of those different gestures. Again, I think the main one would be knowing that you have to double tap anything to interact with it, and using that swipe right to kind of go through things sequentially on the screen, and swipe left to go go to previous items. And I believe I listed a few of those key gestures in the PDF as well. To show you a little bit what it looks like in action, this video shows what it would look and sound like if I wanted to search for a podcast, just to kind of show you what an everyday task would look like using VoiceOver. To show you what an everyday task looks like using VoiceOver, I'm going to search for a podcast. So double tap to open the app. I could use my right swipe to navigate everything on this page. I know search is here. Double tap. I could use, if I double tap here, I could use my regular keyboard with double taps. A nice shortcut though is instead of finding the microphone for dictation, I can use 2-finger double tap to do that. 99% invisible.
Inserted 99% invisible. Search.
Double tap.
99% invisible. Search field. Double tap to edit.
Again, I can use swipe right to navigate everything on this page. When I hear what I want, double tap.
Artwork, image. 99% invisible. Roman Mars. Subscribe. More. 5. Design. A proud member. More. Trailer. February. Episodes.
If I want to scroll down, again, I could use 3 fingers.
Page 2 of 5. Tuesday. February. Sealed episode.
If I hear something I want to listen to, double tap.
February 9th. 430 the Doom Boom. 39-minute left.
And now this is playing.
Now playing.
So I can move my finger down here and double tap anywhere on the screen to pause. So that's what something looks like using VoiceOver. Again, if I want to get back to the home screen without a home button, I swipe up and wait till I hear that lift for home, and that gets me back to the home screen. So just to give you an idea of what something looks like, that 2-finger double tap is kind of a wildcard action. It depends on where you are. So 2-finger double tap would do things like answer the phone. You don't have to go find the phone button to answer. You can just use 2-finger double tap to answer or end a phone call. If you're in the music app listening to music, a 2-finger double tap will start or stop music. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. But if you're in a text field, 2-finger double tap is a lot easier to use dictation to type instead of trying to hunt around and find each individual letter. That's a nice little shortcut to know if you're using VoiceOver. Again, this is not going to be for everybody. It's definitely takes a little bit of an investment and a learning curve. But for instance, if I have an ophthalmologist checkup tomorrow. So if I get my eyes dilated and can't, truly can't see very easily, I will turn on VoiceOver with my accessibility shortcut and queue up a podcast or whatever else I'm wanting to do. I'm a big podcast lover. For what it's worth, these are my favorite podcasts. If I'm having a flare up and just not feeling so great, it's nice to have something that's like, well, I learned something if I stay awake. If I want to go to sleep, these are beautiful talking voices that put me to sleep if that's what needs to happen. So This American Life is great for stories. Backstory is sadly no longer making new episodes, but they have a nice back catalog. That's a history podcast. They can tell you about historical things in relation to recent events, which is fun. And 99% Invisible is a design podcast, but Roman has a great voice. We'll put you to sleep, guaranteed. Okay, not guaranteed, but either you'll learn something or you might go to sleep. Those are my favorites. A couple other third-party apps, so things not made by Apple, but I think potentially could be helpful depending on your situation. So these extend things that didn't come with the iPhone or iPad, basically. So Voice Dream Reader, I believe this one is a little bit of an investment. I didn't write down the price here. I might have put that in the price in the resources PDF. Basically what this lets you do is listen to documents. So if you had they accommodate a pretty wide variety of documents. So if you have a Word document or a PDF that has text in it, not an image, you can import that into this app, and they have more advanced reading controls. So I could open a PDF in whatever PDF app or even the built-in one from Apple and use that speak screen that we talked about earlier where you swipe down with the 2 fingers. But this is going to give you more advanced controls. It has more advanced speed controls. You have more voice options, things like that. So that's another option. There's been a couple times I've gotten long documents that I wanted to listen to, like on a commute, for instance. So I could import those into Voice Dream Reader and hit play while I'm driving along, and it reads them out loud with I mean, it's still a robot voice. It's not like your favorite person reading it out loud to you, but it gives you more controls than just the built-in options on the phone. To go along with that, if you were experiencing low vision and wanted to have a physical document in the real world, somebody hands you a piece of paper and you want to listen to the text on that document with your phone. The item you would need to go from a physical piece of paper to digital text that an app like Voice Dream Reader or even the speak screen could listen to, what you would be looking for is an OCR scanner app. That's optical character recognition. So if you take a picture of something with your phone just sees that as pixels. It doesn't know that that's a menu or a document or a picture of a family member. It just doesn't know it's all pixels. So what an OCR app does is it takes those pixels and does its best to turn those into text that you could like copy and paste, or that an app could read out loud to you. And there's a variety from free to very expensive, depending on your needs for this. So Text Grabber is at least free to some extent. I think they have some premium features. Voice Dream Scanner is a little bit more expensive. Prismo Scanner is more expensive, and KNFB Reader is very expensive, but it is nice. So KNFB Reader is really designed for blind people. I believe if you're using VoiceOver, the advantage of KNFB Reader is I believe it directs you for how to orient your piece of paper and say your paper is not in frame, turn left, turn right. So it helps you just with audio cues, line up your piece of paper to take a picture of it. It then turns that into words, and it has advanced options to instantly read that out loud to you. So any combination of these scanner apps, or there's a million scanner apps that do OCR, most of them cost some kind of money, but if you have a piece of paper that you want to listen to, having it scanned in an OCR app would let you use any of these features to listen to it. And those are all linked in the PDF. These are more in the things that could potentially be interesting. So if you want to play around with them, it's just kind of entertaining, I think. Seeing AI and TapTapSee are two artificial intelligence camera apps that are designed with low vision or blindness in mind. It's just kind of fun to see personally, but you basically point either one of these camera apps at something, and it does its best to identify what's in the picture. I didn't take any screenshots of these, but I could point it at my watch, and it actually does. It'll say like, it's a silver watch and it's 7:15 p.m. Or you take a picture of whatever and it says I took a picture of my living room the other night and it said a white mantle with a white picture above it. So it does its best to identify things for you. Kind of fun. I don't know how practical it is, but it's entertaining at least. Another app that if you want to volunteer to help blind users, Be My Eyes is a crowdsource app. So it's a free app you download to your phone, and you either say I'm a blind user or I'm a sighted volunteer. So I have it on my phone as a sighted volunteer, and if a blind person needs help with something, any sighted, you're randomly matched. The blind person is randomly matched with a sighted volunteer, and you can answer the call. So if someone could ask something as simple as, what's this prescription? Which one am I holding? Or I was working with a blind customer once, and she said, this changed my life. I was lost outside. I got turned around in front of my front door, and I opened this app, and I just pointed my camera places, and they helped me find my front door. So you can volunteer for something as simple as that. Just talk with a blind person for a few minutes on a video call. And it's free. And then in the PDF, Apple highlights various accessibility apps. So this is just a few that I've chosen to suggest. But they have ones for vision, deaf community, cognitive disabilities, all kinds of different things. So there's an accessibility collection. The vision ones are either tips and tricks for vision, like Tap Tap See is one of the ones that's listed, or they're also apps that are just tested to work with VoiceOver. So there's tons of calendar apps on the App Store, but probably only some of them work with VoiceOver. So the accessibility collection will highlight apps that are tested and people have said that they work with VoiceOver. So that may give a few other tips. And that's, again, all of those are listed in the resources in the PDF. So we still have a few minutes for questions. So I know that's a ton of information. So I'm happy to repeat, answer any questions, or if you have a need that maybe I didn't address, let us know. If you have follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to do answer short questions by email, or if you need a consultation, we can discuss that.
So remember to unmute yourself with questions.
I don't see, oh, here's a question. I don't see any raised hands.
I have a question.
Sure.
So when you're doing the voiceover, how do you do again to like, because when I was playing with it, it was sort of reading my entire email, starting with, who sent it, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
If you want to just get to the context, how do you do that again?
Well, I would say the first thing is if you just need a break and you want it to stop reading, that's a touch the screen with 2 fingers and it'll pause. You can scroll if you have a long email, there would be obviously more than one thing on the screen. So you can take 3 fingers to scroll through that, and it would continue scrolling down the screen. There are some other tricks to doing that, but I don't remember something that's off the top of my head that I can share remotely. But the two most helpful, I think, would be 2 fingers to pause and then 3 fingers to scroll down the screen.
Okay.
And then it looks like, let's see. Someone asked, would you be able to do another Zoom? Alyssa asked, would you be able to do another Zoom at some point about using a Mac computer with all these features?
I'd be happy to show the basics. I am not as versed in the Mac just because I don't do it every day. It's significant. The phone is memorizing a few gestures. The Mac is memorizing a lot of keyboard combinations. But there are similar features like Zoom and making things larger. So I'd be open to that. I don't know how often you have support groups or how far those are booked out, but yeah, definitely.
Great. Any other questions?
Catherine, I have serious macular degeneration, and the iPhone is helpful, but it's hard for me even to see those apps and letters. So the iPad is more helpful. In your suggestions, are there videos that could be like tutorials for some of what you've shared with us?
Yes. So in the
slow it down.
Yeah, well, I've never heard that I've talked too fast before ever. So in the resources PDF, when I left Apple in 2018, when I was last teaching these classes, Apple had only written instructions and very few pictures in their documentation. They have added a series of YouTube videos. I wish there were more of them, but when they exist, I linked them in the resources PDF. So a combination of, there are some Apple videos for some things. They have a handful of them about VoiceOver and Zoom. So yeah, those are all linked in the PDF. And then for all of the features, there's some written documentation as well. So if you have somebody to help you read, or could use like a speak screen to listen to it or make it larger on the iPad, those would be options for that.
Mhm. And much of what you've shared today is accessible both iPad and iPhone. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much anything I shared today works on the iPad or iPhone. Mm-hmm.
Good. Thanks.
So someone asked if this is going to be archived. This will be on our website. Catherine, I wonder if we could, if you want to share the QR codes again.
Oh yes, we can go back for that. So yeah, that's the link to download. Either type in the bit.ly address or the QR code to download that PDF. And if you haven't, I suppose I should clarify, if you've never used a QR code before, if you are on any of the recent Apple operating systems, you open your camera app and point it at the QR code. And if you wait a second and have an internet connection, it will give you a little pop-up at the top of the screen, which will take you to the link for the PDF.
There's another question in the chat about a person's husband who has floaters, and wondering if the dark mode would be good for viewing text with floaters.
I think my opinion for most of that is try it out. You know, there's no harm in trying it out. If you don't like it, you can always turn it off, go back the way it was before. I think that could certainly be helpful for floaters, and probably potentially in combination with maybe like a large text or a Zoom, potentially if the floaters are in the way of things. Definitely worth a try.
Can you speak about, Catherine, night shift?
Sure. Yeah, there are a bunch of different color options. Night shift specifically, let me look up where it is. But if you Google Apple, my best Google tip as an aside, if you're looking for something specifically, so say you want to learn more about night shift, start with Apple support night shift, and that will, if they're available, that will give you Apple support articles first. So if you're Googling something, start with Apple support first. And then if you're wanting something specifically on like iPad or iPhone, put that in there. So if I wanted to use night shift on an iPhone, I would start with Apple support iPhone night shift. So if you put in iPad, Mac, that'll get you better results. Night shift changes the color of your screen. So of course, electronics have only been somewhat recently invented. So we're all kind of a part of a large experiment about using blue light, especially at nighttime. So the thought with night shift is that you have blue light coming out of your devices. We didn't historically have blue light at nighttime specifically. So night shift warms the colors of your screen to be a little orange or really orange, depending on how you set the settings. So the thought is potentially turning that on at night might make it a little bit easier to sleep. I think it's helpful. I actually have, they're right here. I have I have these crazy blue blocking glasses that if I have to work on the computer really late at night, that I will wear those. I find that is a little bit easier on my eyes. I don't know that that's backed up by anything, but it's helpful to me. It makes me feel better, even if it's just a placebo effect. But yeah, under display and brightness, there's a night shift option. So you can either schedule that for certain times, manually turn it on, or turn it on from sunrise to sunset to sunrise.
Because I think that, and I can't remember all the data now, but I think that there's a lot of data about the optic nerve and reading at night with a dark room and your bright screen on your phone and causing like whiteouts and scotomas.
I have not read, that detailed of research. There's some of the things about, the thing I've read conflicting things about, is it going to cause problems for your eyes or sleep, but not to that level of detail. So I've said some people love it, some people hate it. My thought is try it I think it's more comfortable personally. If it works for you, great.
Awesome. Did anybody else have any questions?
I think that's it. And we'll have this on our website.
It will be archived. It'll be on the website. You have access to the notes, and we appreciate all your attention this evening. Please feel free to email us if you have any other concerns, and email us with any topics that you want to hear for future support groups. And everybody have a great evening. Thanks for joining.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
for
very
having
much.
me.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Catherine.
thank you, Catherine. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Sis, for
Oh, thanks.
awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lucy.
Muchly
Thank
appreciated.
you. Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
Good
you.
night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Good night now.